And to me, beauty is something you can't capture. You can't hoard it. It happens. It's a moment. It's like the sunset. You have to seek it. And I'm thinking of the quote from Picasso where he said, "I never intended any meaning in my works, but people have it." And so creativity, I think, allows us to, even for moments, forget that, the boss is saying this and society is saying this, and to be able to find that voice that's in me saying, this is where your real breath is. This is who you really are, and you're okay.
Hey friends, you're tuned in to the Learn or Be Learned podcast, a show where wisdom meets curiosity in order to discover the human experience. I'm your host, Shiva Dhana, and remember, you either learn from or you're learned from. Now, let's get back to the show. All right, welcome back, friends, to another awesome episode. I have Rich Kirkpatrick here. He's an author of a very interesting topic of his book that I quite enjoy, which is about creativity. And I will let Rich get a little bit into what he does and who he is. Rich, thank you for being here. It's a great pleasure.
My pleasure, too. Thanks, Shiva.
Yeah, no problem. Would you mind telling the audience a little bit about yourself so they kind of have a background idea?
I spent most of my life as a musician, raised two kids, and I started out in real strict religious institutions as a church musician, and so I had to learn as a creative, like, why do I have all these questions? I'm always getting in trouble.
Right.
And I didn't mean to, but I really learned over the years, that there was something I thought was wrong with me, but I realized later on it wasn't, which we'll get into later. So I was always this conflicted artistic type person. I dabbled in visual arts, but made my living in music. And I was doing workshops for musicians, and a lot of them would ask about the creative process. And I said, well, I kind of have one, but I never really studied it.
Right.
So really over the past 6 to 8 years, I've kind of dabbled in just trying to figure this out. And so in that meantime, I've been a blogger since 2005, which is really ancient. We called them web logs back then, and now they're called blogs.
Right.
So I'm dating myself. So I am over 50 years old. So I've been on the planet quite a few rotations and made lots of mistakes. And one of my passions at this point in life is really just to help other creative people, which I think all people are, to just thrive and do what they love. So that's kind of a little snapshot of me.
That's awesome. I checked out your first few chapters of your book, and one idea that really, actually before we get into that, I think the title, your book is called Mind Blown, and it's essentially about, you mentioned science and magic, right, to create creativity. So, I think that's very interesting if we could start there as to what this, people, when you say science, I'm sure people quite understand, they understand what you're saying here. But then you say magic, right? So I think that's a little intriguing for a lot of people as to what that really means.
Well, I think, that's a great point to drop off. And this whole idea of the bridging science and magic, there's this bridge between them. And so what I've figured out is that there are people, and this is what scientists conclude, that are what they call convergent thinkers naturally, where they tend to sort things to the right answer and they move more in a step-by-step basis. Process in that way. And then there are those of us like myself who are artistic, perhaps imaginative. We fumble along. So science really is the convergent thinker. And then the divergent thinker, as they call it, are the 20% of the rest of us. But the truth is humans are meant to be both of these things. So the bridging between the ways of thinking, these two brain networks, in fact, there's 3 brain networks, if you want to get into that are involved with creativity in particular that neuroscientists have focused on. And one of them is, of course, this divergent thought where you just let your mind go. I was the school kid who got in trouble for doodling on his desk and daydreaming. And I was always trying to figure things out. I would graph in one class. I would graph like city streets and I was an urban planner like at 8 years old. Uh,
Right.
maybe I lost one career I could have had.
Right.
Would have paid better than music, Shiva. So, but anyway, so there's that intuitive point, and then there's the other people who most of us are trained to get that one right answer, like in middle school, fill in the blank math quiz. Here is the word problem, and there is this one answer. And so what happens in divergent thinking is we start with one point and we go to many, and we kind of let the gates open a little bit. We don't judge. And then the second way of thinking, the convergent, is when we kind of close our mind and say, okay, now I want to look at these details. I want to test these ideas. I want to look at them. And so I call this the robot and the wizard. And I have two little characters in the book, and they're not. It's not that everybody's either a robot or a wizard. There's a spectrum, but some of us start like the scientist, like the robot, where we have to have a technical process before we can even begin opening our minds to something, because what we do is very technical, or that's just how we're wired. And then there are those of us who are musicians, and I have to say I am technical as a musician because I took music theory. I used to tutor music theory. It's really mathematics, but I had to get to a point where I could intuitively feel something in a moment, even with a piece that I'm familiar with, and perform it, and know what's going to move an audience by intuition. So anyway, so those robots and wizards amongst us, really the key is the magic, which is really the metaphor for the things that are more intuitive, and then the science, which is really a metaphor for just the logical side of us, really have to interact. And the creative people, this is what the scientists say, I think is wonderful. The most creative among us can travel that bridge faster, back and forth. So
Okay.
it's really fascinating. And so as
The bridge
we,
between what exactly?
between divergent thinking and convergent thinking, between
Really?
magic and science, as I said,
Mm-hmm.
between the wizard and robot. And so, because what happens in our brain, there's a third network involved with these two other networks that has to basically, like the job, not drawbridge. That's not, the drawbridge has to lift for the boats to go, but the cars then have to wait. And so
Right.
these two ways of thinking are that different. So the bridge going up and down is this other brain network that helps us travel. And so as we become more agile and more used to this, one will frustrate everybody because they'll think, are you thinking strategically or tactically, Rich, at this moment?
Right.
And because I'm going back and forth. And those are the people, the Sherlock Holmes, the Michelangelos of the world, who really are able faster than we can. But you know what I learned is that we can do things that get us to be more creative, which is that traveling back and forth.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting because I feel like with many things in life, we think it's black or white, but it's really gray, right? Like you said, it's a spectrum of we all have both qualities. It's just how much of which side are you is really the question here. Have you heard of the EOS model in business?
I vaguely am familiar with that.
Right. So it's almost a similar concept between two types of entrepreneurs to run a business is a visionary and an integrator. And an integrator is more so focused on the steps, the implementation, and how to get the system going. And the visionary is jumping around, giving you ideas and going like 10 steps ahead, and you got to drag them back and say, hey, no, 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 we got to focus on this step first before we start a new idea. So that's kind of what the EOS model is. And it sounds kind of similar, right, to that kind of concept of creativity of the wizard versus the robot, which sounds more like an implementer.
Yeah, and that's really in the creative process. It's also a recursive process. So you have I had a triangle involved in it. So you have
Right,
basically the discovery of ideas, then the development of ideas, and then the delivery of ideas. But in the real
right.
world, we have something, say a product. We have an idea, and then we take it to research development, of course, and then we might deliver it and discover that we got the audience wrong. So then we go back and maybe hone, develop it further, or
Hmm.
we may scrap and start with a whole new idea. And sometimes, so it feels like it's going backwards, where a lot of the enlightenment way of thinking is step one, two, three, and four. The
Right.
key to help both the wizard and the robot, both the implementer and the innovator, is that if they're able to switch the modes, either by a team or by themselves, they can really be successful. And in this world, we have to move fast. So, um,
Right.
but yeah, so it's not just a straight line, but it is in steps. So
Hmm.
that helps one side of it. Hey, I'm taking a step. But also because it doesn't have to always move forward. The wizards of the world can feel a little more imaginative, but I don't have to know everything at this moment,
Hmm.
but I have to decide to take a step.
Right. So, what helps somebody switch between back and forth of these two, divergent and convergent thinking?
That's a really good question. I think part of it
Hmm.
is learning one scientist that I quote in the book. She has 7 brain sets, she calls them. And she has
Brain
different
sets. Okay.
things to. One of the brain sets would be flow. It's kind of a popular word now, but what she defines it in a particular way, where you're able to focus in this particular mode of flow, where you're hyper focused on something, and allowing yourself to have periods of that is helpful. Curiosity, for instance, if you as a young kid, we didn't really have Game Boys. I did get a Game Boy when it first came out, but I was an adult by that time, and I loved it. And still have the original Game Boy. Oh, my
So
son has it
good.
now, by the way. He inherited it. It's a family heirloom. So
Right.
we were in car trips, right? And we're bored. We're a bunch of kids in the car, and so we would find license plates of different states or different color cars. And so, for instance, find the orange cars. That's an odd color. Once
Mm,
you find one, then you find another and another, and if
mm,
pretty soon you feel like the world is swarming with orange cars.
yep.
So that's an example of expanding your curiosity. When you put yourself in that mode, you're going to be able to then recover a lot more of that particular thing you're looking for.
Yeah.
And so there's 2 words that one creative researcher he used: invention versus intention. So sometimes we intend for this result to happen. And so all that can do is binary. It's either going to work or not. But invention means what is around me. And the
Mm,
word has this connotation of like a shipwreck, going in and discovering things in there that are of value, or the junkyard, whatever it is. Or when I used to live in Los Angeles, we would leave like a desk or something out, or find one, and
hmm.
oh, I could paint that.
Right.
And so you invent something with what you have around you. And so creativity, really, if you break down that bridge, really the purpose of the bridge isn't to find this huge leap that is beyond reason. It's really to find the most imaginative step, iteration that you could possibly find, the right one. Because really, often in um, incremental ways is where genius is seen. It's like in the Olympics, the the 5 people racing are far above everybody else, but then the top person there is just an increment above everybody. And creativity is kind of like being with fellow Olympic athletes and really
Hmm.
being able to get to that next thing. So in invention, as opposed to limiting myself to whether this works or not, I may discover a third thing by, um, say, a process that didn't work for sales. Wow, that really helped our employees with their morale. So this is a department that's just suffering. And
Right.
so let's take that process and train them with it because it seemed like it had this result. So you invent something that never was there before by being open, and that openness itself is the bridge.
Right. And I think that's arguably one of the most important reasons for creativity, right? Is to think of ideas in new ways. Because without a change in ideas, a change in systems, then society doesn't move forward, really.
No, no,
Yeah.
I think, and then if you take a dialogue, which a lot of people in our society cannot even sit and speak with somebody who has different viewpoints than they have.
Hmm.
And it's the sadness of that is it's not having an open mind doesn't mean compromising your conscience.
Yes. Right.
Having an open mind means that you're willing to be empathetic to another human being's experience, even if it's somewhat offensive at the moment,
Hmm.
to do that. And I call that embracing the awkward. That's to go to the other side of the bridge, depending on which way you start, the convergent or divergent, as an example. Um, the other side feels awkward because it's not your
Right.
preferred. And practicing that allows for that. Having conversations with people you don't know on purpose allows you to be more empathetic. So, but
Right.
that's part of what creativity is. And in fact, I've learned to say this, and I would have really put in bold letters somewhere in the book that creativity is just another word for what people do when we thrive.
Mm,
So when we're thriving, we're having conversations, we're able to take criticism, we're able to call out things that are unjust in a way that's helpful. All of that happens when we thrive, when we're able to have a voice, we're able to see what that step is. We're not looking for 25 steps ahead, which we want to get to. We have a dream for that perhaps, but we're able to say,
right.
here's a step we could all do together. And that's really what society needs right now. So we need creativity, um, and that transformation comes in steps.
Right. So with your book, I wrote down this one point you made. This is actually the point I wanted to jump into as soon as we started, but I wanted to
Okay.
take a step back and get everybody caught up. Right? You mentioned when it comes to creativity, beauty matters. And I think that's so important because, and a very undervalued point, because if we look at it, like for example, communication, only a small portion of communication is verbal, and many of it, which our brain perceives and psychoanalyzes, is non-communication, non-verbal gestures, the appearance, tonality, inflection points of where you're speaking, when you're saying it, right? So we perceive not just what the words are said, but how they're interpreted matters just as much. And in the similar context, I think that's where beauty comes into play, right? You're talking about appearance and how that impacts creativity. So I would love to touch on that point.
When it says creativity is defined as something beautiful and useful, utility is something that seems just driven in by our culture, especially the business culture. Does it work? And then we later ask, the aesthetics or other questions. And to me, beauty is something you can't capture by, you can't hoard it. It happens. It's a moment. It's like the sunset. You have to seek it. And there's a cloudy day. You have to come back another day to find that moment. But it's being open for that mysterious, that's the magic here in a sense. We're into the science of utility. Let's just make sure everything works for everybody. But we're not looking at, well, we're human beings. So we're physical creatures. So we need rest. We need attention beyond. That's why, during the pandemic, Zoom, is exhausting for people. They didn't realize that because it's not like normal. And this is great because we have a period of time that we get to have a conversation. But if you're like doing that wall to wall 10 hours, it's not human, because if you're sitting in a room for 10 hours with people, you'd be getting up, you would be having breaks, you would be eating, like I'd be sipping my espresso and you would know that I'm doing that. So beauty though is being open, I think, to being enraptured by something, um, not necessarily in an irrational way, but something that you're allowed to be moved by. And um, we kill it when we want to make it a commodity. We want to make something beautiful a commodity. You know, uh, this is what fast food is compared to a home cooked meal by someone with skill. There's just, you can't, because in the home cooked meal, you're going to eat with a chef, which is either your partner or your mom or somebody. My dad cooked, and when we would eat together, there was just this sense, a beauty in it. It's just, you didn't have to say anything about it. You just knew when you sat with the people you love and a meal was prepared. There was something mystical about that. And creativity, I think, the thriving part of what we need is to find ways to be open and leave space for those things to happen. If we're only looking for a product to solve a problem, and as I say, we're not willing to look at the human pain, address the human pain, creativity, this is the two sides again. The scientists, oh, we got a problem to solve. Here it is. We need these numbers changed to this number at some point in time. Well, what's the human pain involved in it? How are we addressing humanity? Beauty is just another kind of a point to ask that question. We are humans. So we both need to solve the problem. Um, we need to, if I'm an artist, I need to create art of some sort, but also need to pay rent. I also need uh, friends, but I also need patrons. So, but if I'm only looking at transactions and I'm not looking at beauty, not looking at something that has value beyond its utility, then I'm dehumanizing myself as well as other people. Because in a family, if one person loses, the whole family loses. If the little baby who's taking lots of these resources or the old uncle who we're taking care of who can't pay his way, we're not valuing that part of our own humanity. When we go into business where we're looking for, does it work here to here, we have to factor in that people losing is losing. It's the zero sum is a myth in this way, because we can't let someone win or lose in a family. And I think that's why I think, our tribal nature as human beings is a powerful, beautiful thing when it works. And why, when we're distressed and can't work together and solve problems, it causes so much angst in us and in society, is because it's easier to criticize with a click than it is to create and to listen. And it's kind of like saying, but it's like saying to everybody, I feel like Don Quixote fighting the windmills and saying, um, to someone like myself when I'm overweight, like, okay, Rich, you got to exercise and diet. Yeah, we all know that, but I'm going to eat what I want to eat. And I think we do the same thing with creativity. Oh yeah, we need to create and do great things and come up with solutions and have allow for beauty and value of people, but we're going to do the path of least resistance. And creativity calls us to something beautiful in that we can allow people to be more human and including especially ourselves. Like, who are we? Are we willing to look at that, um, and allow others into that space?
Can beauty be replicated through the creative process, or is it individualized for each individual's personality?
That's an
Right.
interesting question.
Mm.
I'm I'm thinking of the quote from Picasso, where he said, "I never intended any meaning in my works, but people have it." But
Mm.
so he, as an artist, loved what he did. It brought him a particular sense of that. But something beautiful in his work was seen differently by different people in different decades. Um, and so it is both of those things. That's the power of being open to that. Is that when we create something that addresses the human pain, which is, I think, that angle of what is beautiful, what's valuable, what's human, and we look at that, it has the possibility of doing that. So songwriters, friends of mine, they write the breakup song that we all need to hear. And there's a beauty in that, that then they may not have even gone through a breakup. They're just writing a good story that they heard. So the replication of it is really a human quality. Stories, as I've said in the book, are containers for our dreams. So as we learn what a story is and we see, it just allows us to be open to beauty. I don't think it's something we can hoard or contain or replicate, but it's something innate that if we allow the space to be nurtured, then we'll see it. If we, are willing to not break things and move forward, as Zuckerberg says, instead, if we're willing to plant the tree that gives shade to the next generation and see the beauty in that, that my part of that, the beauty I get to be a part of, is knowing that that earth, as I'm sitting in it, someday will be nurturing the comfort of someone else. That's a beautiful thought, but that takes, a lot of stoicism, I guess, for us to go into. And we need that in order to see beauty. We need to, it's not just a dopamine hit and euphoria that we need to constantly go for. So in our creativity, we have to, as we slog through those difficult things in the process, like I said, embracing the awkward, going to our opposite side. The artist, for instance, learning to embrace some kind of process so they can sell their works, or the innovator, businessman being willing to listen, to have some empathy towards the end result, to the environment or to other people his business has on people. As each side, it's going to be painful, but that's where the beauty's found, and that's kind of where creativity, like I said, it's when we thrive, it's just what we do automatically.
I was trying to wrap my head conceptually around this idea of beauty. It reminds me of it reminds me of morality, right? It's one of those things that we don't know exactly what it is, but we know what it's not. It's almost like that, right? So, but in a sense, because I was thinking, what about mass appeal? Because if you think about, for example, the song, like you were saying, you get a large audience base. That means you found quite a bit of people that also believe in a collective that something is beautiful, right? But then it was kind of what you said towards the end that kind of wrapped it all together, made sense. Is the beauty is in the process, it's in the steps, is how you got there, right? Because Picasso's first painting didn't go, mass appeal and everybody didn't find it collectively beautiful. Even if it was great, he still was still an early process. And as you refine and almost in a way chisel at you know, your art, whatever you're making, I think that's where the beauty hides, right?
It does. And so if you don't embrace the process, you're not going to be satisfied. Um, I've created some really great things that no one's ever going to see. And am I okay with that? Um, am I a better person for making them? I know I can make them. I know I can write a song that is a really quality song. It's just not commercial. So what we do is we look at qualitative measurements and not quantitative measurements. We look at only the end results of utility, not the process that helps us build our character to who we are. And creativity is a way of slowing us down enough to look at the process of life. We take in a breath and we exhale a breath, and those breaths are limited. So that should give us pause to, how am I going to enjoy this moment? This moment that we had right now in this conversation can be one of those mystical moments. And maybe it is, if I pay attention. Maybe every single conversation I have where we are taking breath in and out can have that quality. So yeah, if we wrap ourselves only to results, there's a problem. Now, obviously, we have to, like I said, pay rent, um, and those kinds of things are real. But um, that's that different kind of creativity. We can't just only live in that space. We have to have, from within us intrinsically, we have to have uh, something that's keeping us going. If it's only things from the outside, then we're not living in any freedom. And so creativity, I think, allows us to, even for moments, forget that, the boss is saying this and society's saying this, and to be able to find that voice that's in me saying, this is where your real breath is. This is where, this is who you really are, and you're okay. That part. So be that person. If I'm not with that person enough, then I'm not going to know that. And Picasso, with all that he created as an example, was just trying to figure that out. And the replication, as again, back to replicating beauty, is just the imprint, I think, of those things. Even if it's a famous, song, but the mass appeal thing, here's another test for it. What's the historical curve? Is it like, a top 40 song and then it's gone? But is there something that transcends? And I think that's a quality that everybody really would love to have in their work. Is it's more than just me.
Right. Almost a sense of collective belief gives it the validation that it's beautiful. But I think when you get to that point where you truly believe something's beautiful, is I think at the moment where you're enjoying the journey, right? The process. But that brings me to what you were asking, or sorry, what you were mentioning just now, is to take a deep breath and almost be there in the present moment. And that, I start wondering, does creativity spark when you're in the present moment or when you're in future thinking? Where does that stem from? Right. So, for example, maybe your mind's wandering about the next vision, the next step, the next progress. Does creativity come there, or does it come when you're and you're just observing the present moment? Or was it both?
That's a really good question, because one of the things that I was led to understand is the brain networks. The default mode network technically is the divergent way of thinking. In order to have, quote, mindfulness, you want to get yourself out of that so your thoughts aren't spiraling in all these different directions, so that you can find this point of mindfulness. So creativity is the choice. Do I focus or do I defocus? And both of
Mm,
those are the moment may determine that. I think it's having that regulation, that discipline, again, the bridge. The mindfulness maybe is another word for the bridge. Is just, am I able to kind of just say, here I am in center spot? The only problem with that is if we stay there, we're not going to either point. We're not progressing. And it's nice to stay there, though. Friends of mine who
right.
they can stay there and they're great, but then at some point we have to feel and be, and then also be terrified by the potential future. An example of this is one of the scientists. She, in one of her books, was saying that imagination is logical. So the executive functions of your brain are involved. So you walk up, she was talking about this, you walk up to a cliff and your body starts to tense up, and what's happening is
Hmm.
that your brain is looking at the possibilities of a few different futures, a multiverse. If I trip, if someone pushes me, that I'm going down, all of these things happen and you start to
Yeah.
spiral in your mind. Okay, there's a little bit of danger, so maybe I'll take a step back. Or then your logic, you start at the end point of it, say, I'm fine though, because there's a fence here and no one's around and I'm okay. It's not windy. But that is logical. It's actually a point of reasoning going on in your mind with all of those emotions. And some of us culturally grew up in situations where emotions were not valued. You, that was my experience in some of the dark side of the religious part of it was that you're not supposed to feel. Don't listen to that. But the scientist, she's telling me no. There's some logic to that. So it's maturing enough to know, okay, is this just anxiety? And
Mm,
my logic will tell me, yeah, Rich, you're just being anxious. There isn't a cliff. That's what trauma does to us. Our body remembers that, and we're living in a situation that is safe, but it's not. Um, so a lot of this, I'm going on a real big tangent here. Sorry about that. Uh,
all
but
good. Keep going.
I'm just like such a nerd, so thank you for letting me just talk.
No,
Um,
no, this is interesting.
but
Yes, please
but this
go.
stuff is so important, I think, because
Yeah.
we need to embrace that part of ourselves and um, our minds. Where are we going with our minds? So back to that whole point of default mode network is what do I do? Yeah, you have to be at some point the future and open minded to that. And there's other points where no, I have to be here right now. I'm having a meal, just as an example, and I need to just, I'm chewing. I'm not in front of my computer. Like earlier today, I was eating crackers with almond butter, and it was kind of hard to swallow. And I said, wait a minute, I need to just sit down and eat. We don't give ourselves permission to do either of those points enough. So, it's okay to come to that mindful place to know that we can do that. But I think that's just a practice to show us when we're in either, we can switch, we can bridge between them. It's not the solution.
Right. I'm a huge subscriber to the idea of stoicism, and which I think is often misunderstood as zero emotions, right? And I'm sure as you're aware, it's more of being in control of your emotions and when and where it comes out. And it almost sounds like you're saying part of the creative process is letting that emotions out finally and having that sense of emotional guidance in creativity. Is that the case?
That is the case. And it's also understanding that when you're not cognizant of it, it's still there. Um,
What do you mean?
one of the scientists used to say that there's in the back of mind, the negative emotions in the background are often what speak silently to us and allow us to create. It's not
Hmm.
the euphoric ones. Um,
Really?
so so that's it is. So the negative things in the back of our mind are what propel us to create. And so I don't know. I think stuffing it, like ignoring it
Right.
completely, is the choice. It's not so much now I need to feel and be touchy feely at the moment. It's more of I just need to not avoid. When I kind of understood this, it kind of opens it up for me a little bit because It's not going to, oh, I got to be more emotional because I'm already
Mm.
super emotional. It's just being willing. It's just being willing to not inhibit that all the time and have
Right.
spaces where I can do that. So I have a puppy, and the puppy helps me. Uh,
Right.
I think having a puppy is like a spiritual practice. You know, you have to get up and take care of it and not think of yourself, and you have to be present. And look at, I have this puppy. It's a beautiful little animal, and it will
Hmm.
not be a puppy for long.
Hmm.
And so there's a sense of that in creativity. That do I look at my moments that way? They're fleeting. Do I value them? So I'm valuing my moments and not just wasting them away on Xbox, which I like, by the way. So I have to get away from the Xbox sometimes. But what that does is it keeps me distracted from this not so comfortable thing.
Right. So, please correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I understand that you had just mentioned, is it often the negative emotions that are the catalyst for creativity and change?
I think so. I think setbacks. The most inspiring people happen to be really their stories are quite wow. Yeah. So it's not really. Um, I don't think people have to overthink that.
Yeah.
Don't cause any more pain in your life than you have to. Don't. The tortured
Yeah,
artist
right,
is the
right.
other trope that is wrong, because the tortured artist is someone who's not healthy enough to even just be in society, and those people don't end up creating much anyway. It's the people who actually are that. And there's whole mental health is another issue, sidebarring with all of that. Uh, People like me who have ADHD, for instance, at different degrees of it, um, have certain things that we have to overcome that are a little more difficult. So part of the book, towards the end, I talk about motivations, and a lot of the things I think that are good for ADHD people are good for anyone in their creative process, because I named them characters, like there's Mr. and Mrs. Should've. So should have, could have. If we had that voice, Rich, you should have done this. You could have done that. And that's in being creative. I can think of many things for many hours about should haves. And so that person, that voice that's in me, but it's not really me, is clouding my mind. And so I have to talk to them and say, oh, shut up. It doesn't do me any good. I need to think about what ifs, if I do this, and take the same negative energy and emotion, but then turn it to the future. And I think that's kind of that's the challenge for a lot of us. It's like, yeah, we understand negativity, but we're paralyzed by it. And I think the reason is, like, from my own experience and from what I've read, is because we don't make that shift from reliving the past and the traumas to saying, well, I could do something for others through this, for myself. And
Right. Like a
stoicism helps
healthy
because it's like,
output.
it's limited. So yeah. So why waste it on shit? Because that person doesn't care anyway. They're like laughing, scoffing at me as they say, Rich, you should have. Some of us have had actually literal people like that.
Right. That's so interesting because if you think about it, if your life is in the middle here in the status quo, positive emotions would often mean you're content with what's going on. So oftentimes the creativity process might not even be there because you're content. And if you're in the status quo and something, painful, angry, whatever happens in the negative side, it's often the catalyst that pushes you back, right? From back to the
Mm,
middle ground. And what's so interesting is because you had mentioned being part of a tribal unit as us humans are so important. So
mm.
it's interesting because as a tribal unit, nobody wants your negative emotions, right? Positive emotions, everybody will share with you all day and all night. If you're happy, if you're loving, encouraging, all sorts of things. But it's the negative emotions that people have to suppress. And if you bottle it up, creates trauma. So the healthiest way is to find a positive output for it. For some people, it's
Oh yeah.
martial arts. So for others, it's painting, sculpting, whatever that may be, music, right? Like you said, a breakup song would be a perfect example. It's taking that negative energy and almost transmuting it into something that's positive.
I love the word transmuting, by the way.
Yeah,
Um,
thank you.
this there's the other side to this as well. That's a little more even practical, like in the business sense. So, a friend of mine who has a drum company, I mentioned a little story in the book about him. He just was not satisfied with the drum sounds he was getting. And he had in his mind, this doesn't work. This doesn't work. I was in a project with him, and he had a garage warehouse full of vintage instruments that were all amazing. So his ear was very esoteric when it come to that, like a sommelier of drummers.
Mm.
So he just started to think about designing, and then in his tribe, talked to engineers and other people and started a business making drums. And now it won the best of show at the NAMM show, which is, people who are musicians know, that's the largest trade show in the world, which is amazing. At least in America, it's the largest US one. So, and he said his family business he wants to pass on to his kids now started because he was dissatisfied with the way the drums he was playing sounded. So dissatisfaction is one part of that negativity. So in our culture, we often say, good job, and everybody gets a participation trophy and all that. At some point, the reason why, that negative feedback we're not willing to take sometimes, like, are you satisfied, Rich, with how you did? We don't like that kind of question in our education system. My wife's an educator. She tells me this all the time. Kids can never be told they're wrong because parents don't want their kid to be
Yeah.
told wrong. They want them to achieve by, kind of sliding through. The best thing for us sometimes is to learn that I can do better. Doesn't mean that I'm bad. And this is where our culture said, well, that you're calling me bad. You're attacking me. As opposed to, no, you are better than what you are right now. I am seeing creatively this person who could achieve more. And that, I think, is what we need more in our tribal sense, is the creative thought that says, we're not satisfied with each other because we see the potential. We see the enormous positive. So the positive emotion doesn't get us to positive results because, like you said, we're stuck. Some good friends of mine, these guys all had very, very well-paying jobs. They love me around because I'm kind of the muse, and their cigars cost more than my rent. Right? But they reached the pinnacle in life, and they were very
Mhm.
happy, and I was not satisfied. And I don't. There's no moral issue here whatsoever. They're great people, but it's just, at my point in life, and this is for those of us who are a little older. Why should we be satisfied? There's so much more to live. There's so much I could do and say. So why even put a book out after you're 50 years old? Well, I finally hit my head against the wall long enough. I hope I can help the next guy who's doing it go a little further than I did by the time they're 33, and not be all burned out. So that sense of dissatisfaction, are we willing to embrace it?
Right. And perhaps that's where the beauty stems from, is the transformation of a negative pain as a catalyst towards something positive.
And it's hard for us to, we want quick results, steroids without the lifting.
Yeah. Right.
I had a personal trainer a few years ago. It just changed my life. The guy was mean in the right way, but he saw my
Right. The
potential.
hard coach.
He was like, "Hard goes Rich," but
Yeah.
he was my friend. He helped me out so much. I didn't think I could ever put a rack on my back and do the squats. This older guy doing it, and said, I can't ever do that, but no, I could. I've had friends who at 45 did their first marathons.
Wow.
And I had a friend of mine who, for his 65th birthday, he ran a triathlon, and there wasn't one happening, so he made his own up.
Oh my God.
Um,
Wow.
so, yeah. So,
That's incredible.
all I need to
Yeah.
do, though, is just a little bit more than that. I don't think, I went, those are great people, but the thing is, how you get there is really, how am I dealing with the daily? Am I really stoic enough to really appreciate the value of every moment and every breath? And
Right.
that's really hard to do for some of us.
Yeah. That really shows the power of the mind. And oftentimes it's your own limiting beliefs that may even be hindering your creativity, right? Because if we shut our brain down from thinking, oh, I can't do that, then all your brain's going to look for is reasons why you can't do that. And that almost stops the flow of the creativity, right?
It does. And there's kind of two
Yeah.
sides of limitations as well. Again, a bridge here, because our limited thinking is a problem, not the limitations of physics, which is crazy
Mm,
because we can't change physics. We
right.
can change our thinking, but we can't change physics. Well,
Right.
at least at this point in history, we can't, which is probably good because given the moral character
Right.
of a lot of the people who have a lot of resources and money out there, I don't know if I trust them with that
Right.
ability. Right. Now, let's just be honest. But there's a beauty and limitations. In one of the chapters, I talk about this, and I call it the sandbox, and really embracing their limitations, which is very stoic thinking, by the way,
Mhm.
is really a beautiful thing because then I know how far I can go. And one business guy in a meeting, he was a VP of a Fortune 100 company, and uh, retired from that, semi-retired, and he raised his hand in this little creative workshop I was doing. He said, "Rich, I thought creative people didn't want any boundaries or any limitations on them." And I said, "That's
Mhm.
what we want you to think.
Mhm.
But if you tell us make this, make X, and but without any parameters, we'll be panicked." I call it blank panic canvas attack.
It's like when you're trying to write an essay and you can't even get the first sentence because you're just staring at a blank page, or not
Yeah,
even an
well,
essay. I guess a blank, like you're starting a whole new story and you don't know where to start.
yeah, and you don't even know if it's a story. Is it an
Yeah,
essay?
yeah, right,
Is it a story? Is it 500 words
right,
I'm supposed to write, for school?
yeah,
Or is it like, a blog post of 300 words? Like, Chat
right.
GTP is going to
It's
take
like
care
if
of
the
it.
teacher said write something and bring it back tomorrow as homework. You're just like, ugh.
Yeah, we have to have some container or some kind of a sandbox, as the tech people do use that metaphor, to
Yeah,
test and try things out, but also just to show
right.
us how far we could go. And it's not being outside the box; it's knowing what the box's edges are. That really makes something creative.
That's so interesting. I never thought about needing parameters for creativity, but that makes total sense. So, let's say, for example, you are a musician or you're an artist of some fashion. Do you create your own parameters? And if so, what kind of parameters are we? What would you look for to spark
Oh
creativity?
yeah.
Right. You don't want to put yourself too tight in a box, right?
I know one fellow who said he was going to create something every day. He's a visual artist. So he gave himself this parameter of, I'm going to do the minimum. I forgot what the medium, I think it was any medium, digital, uh, doodles, whatever it was. And he ended up doing it for 10 years. Now, my daughter, I mentioned, she's a visual artist, and she was um signed up for a prompt where October she watercolored a painting of a flower every single day, 31 days. So, yes, I think giving ourselves parameters when there aren't any for the sake of um, that is kind of like a spiritual practice in a way because we are engaging in something that is beneficial to us because we choose the discipline, we choose what it is. Journaling is something that I think is very powerful that we don't do enough of. There's research that shows journaling, for instance, which I think the other kinds of things we would do, like painting or cooking or gardening, whatever things that we're doing creative, hospitality, having people over and creating that experience, whatever it is, that there's something that happens in journaling where they had cancer patients journal their trauma. And as they progressed in journaling, they discovered something interesting that the language went from me to we. They became empathetic to those around them and the world because they were started with their own pain. This is again back to the whole idea of the pain. But the other thing happened physically. There was proven healing results from that activity, and there's two or three other studies since that one study that have proven that case. And so, to go to our space and to get a regular habit of something, a parameter, and choosing to do that can be something very healing for us. When it starts out for ourselves, it could end up that it benefits others. And that really is important, I think, with a lot of people when we talk about mental health. We're talking about let me take care of everybody first, but it's really kind of like on the airplane. First, put the oxygen mask on your face before helping the person next to you
Right.
or your child. And that makes sense because how can if I can't breathe in, how can I breathe out to somebody?
Right. Right. So as as I'm sure you're aware, after almost a decade of studying this, and you've talked to probably plenty of neuroscientists, right? The idea of a neuron, which, for the audience members that may not be fully aware, is there's 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 different parts of the cell, and then at the end of the cell there's those dendrites, right? And you got that's where a neuron connects to another neuron, and that's what we call like synaptic connections. Is in a scientific way, is that what you would call creativity? Is it the new neural synaptic connections that are happening over time, right? Because I'm sure you've heard of this research paper or something similar, where they had two groups of people. One focused on making like a clay pot. They had like, let's say a week to do it, but they could only make one pot. So they focused all their attention on one pot. The other group was told to just make a pot every day for the week. And oftentimes it was the second group that worked on a different pot every day that had far more creative outputs. So that almost makes me wonder, is that where the neural connections are happening, right?
Hmm. I think the whole idea of now we're understanding the idea of brain networks, not right or left brain, but that there's these different multiple connections in areas of the brain specifically to creativity that go in. That's why they call it divergent thought, because it's not the right brain or left brain, even though we know that the language is on one side and we see more images on the other side of the brain. We're learning that yes, it is those networks, and that's kind of where the bridge comes in, because more on the level of uh, the neuroscientists could tell you this, where I'm scared to even speak too much on this, but what you're saying is true. You build more connections, and you can do that when you're even like an old guy like me. You can, it's amazing. So I can build muscle too, but it's probably easier for my mind to stay sharper and learn new things. And so doing creative practices, uh, we mentioned that one about curiosity, looking for something that you don't normally look for, having a conversation with a person that's different than you, a person from a different background, a different belief system, and it in all those things are building connections in your brain, and they're allowing you to have more pathways to bridge, again that word bridge, back and forth between different parts of your brain where we can see those ideas. The thing is that I was excited is that neuroscientists unanimously said, I think anyway, we are the only creature on the planet that can do this. Our brains are particularly wired to be creative. So all the information mashed in, and how from the input areas back to the back of the head, how that all is put together is so unique to mankind, which is interesting. I think the ramifications of that is to say to a person who says, I don't feel I'm creative, yes, you are. It's like saying a dog doesn't want to smell. Um, you are designed, your brain, dogs can smell thousands of times better than we can, right? Their brains and everything are designed for that. Our brains are designed to be creative, and that involves so much. But to know that even, and that we could grow that, I think could be inspiring to some who feel like, what do I have left to do? Um, make a different pot every day. Pick
Right.
something. You have the free. If
Right.
you have the freedom to pick something, that's such a great honor to have in your life, that you could choose that. And other people who can't choose that they're actually saying, go for it. It's like almost if everyone on the planet saying you get to choose to do something like that, and you doing it, you're doing it for us. It's kind of like artists when they do their thing. We all feel inspired because we don't have the maybe the talent, or we didn't start at 4 years old or whatever, doing whatever they're doing, and it allows us to feel more human because we see a person sing a certain way, or how they're able to speak or build a business like no other person can. Um, and we need to feel not zero sum and envious. We need to all celebrate that, because of what that is. It's showing us kind of a spotlight of what we all are like inside. That's why I say it is a genius that we all have.
Right. You know, I'm sure as someone who's studied the science and human nature of creativity, and you've talked to plenty of scientists, I'm sure this topic had to have come up about how drugs affect the brain and the creativity process. And I'm just curious as to what exactly is going on there. Is it an aid? Is it a crutch? Is it something that almost accelerates the process. For example, right, marijuana or psychedelics. I think oftentimes you hear people use those drugs to spark creativity. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, just going for one of the scientists that she wrote that not really much help either way, except for coffee. And she can
Coffee?
prove that the coffee itself had a direct correlation or result causation. But uh, I drink a lot of coffee, or caffeine gives me because it helps. It's like Ritalin for
Right,
for my focus.
right.
But that's kind of cool. But no, I've just and maybe there's a lot more to. I'm sure there's a lot more to this. From my understanding, I don't think that there's really a huge benefit. So I like to have a little bit of whiskey. But if I really want to think, my best creative, this is just from my experience, is early in the morning when I get up and have a coffee and I'm just, boom, I can be present for this certain amount of hour. I could write 1,000 words. Um, uh, if I'm in the evening with a little bit of whiskey or something, it's not going to help. It could help me sing, hang out with friends. And I might feel like I'm more creative.
Right.
And maybe the social aspect of those things have a benefit. But I don't know if I don't know if I've read anything that says if you take these things, you become more of a creative genius. If we're always looking for a pill or something, I think if we had a creative steroid, it would be so valuable because creativity is valued. Um, but no, someone hopefully maybe there's someone who can say, no, Rich, here's some studies on that, but I haven't read any of them, and I certainly haven't researched this that far. I'm just beginning to scratch the surface.
I bring this up because from what I've researched and understood about it is especially psychedelics particularly create different synaptic connections in the brain that otherwise weren't there before. So I'm just intrigued as to, I'm wondering, does that, like we said, making a different pot every day for 7 days can create new connections. And I'm wondering if that also would do the same thing. Um, but this isn't to endorse anybody to try anything, but it's just a curious topic.
No, I don't. Well, here's my opinion. My opinion is this: you can't hack creativity. It's a practice, and iteratively you grow in it. Just like you can't hack getting healthy. You have to eat well, sleep. You can get steroids and get puffed up muscles, but that has other problems. Or um, you can have different things. The hacking of life and hacking of that. One of the chapters, I think, if I can remember how I titled it, "Hustle is the Idea Killer." Um, the whole addictions that we have. We actually are so chemically driven already that to add more chemicals
Right.
is just,
That, and I'm sure multitasking.
yeah. Oh, multitasking is terrible.
Yeah.
We are in
Yeah.
America. We have no law. I didn't know this. There's no law that limits the amount of hours a person can work. So, I mean, if a person chooses to work 100 hours ish more, there's no regulation. Maybe in my state of California there is. I don't know, but there isn't federally anything stopping that. We had uh, taking vacation. There's a large percentage of people who never take their paid time off, and so we are a tired group of people, overworked in the sense of hustling and not resting enough. Creativity requires rest. There's this whole process in the development or the discovery phase of ideas called incubation, where things need to lay dormant. It's like cows chewing the cud. We can yell at the cow, as Gordon MacKenzie, an author, said, um, and say, make more milk. And or we're going to slaughter you. You're no good because you're not making milk. I'm going to take you to the slaughterhouse because you're out there chewing the cud on in the meadow. Well, the cow's making milk. And if you let the cow eat and chew the cud and throw all the different stomachs and do all the things that they do, which I understand a little bit about, I'm not a farmer. Um, that's how milk is made. Creativity is like
Right.
that. And so incubation and rest, the idea of that, the aha idea, the eureka moment that comes, is always preceded by a period of rest. And so that period of rest is not necessarily just doing nothing, but sometimes it is taking a nap because you might be overworked. Naps are underrated, by the way.
Right.
Um, uh, they are underrated, but yeah.
It almost sounds like patience is a really important portion of the creative process because it because one of my first episodes, actually the first episode I did on this podcast, was over the book called Bored and Brilliant, and it essentially talked about
Hmm.
boredom to unlock and inspire creativity. And it almost, reading that book, I think a lot of people would, when you tell them about boredom, it feels very counterintuitive. It feels like you're wasting time because of that hustle culture, right? We're not seeing something instantly gratified, or we're not seeing the results right away. But how does one acquire the patience to say, okay, for example, right, Bill Gates has a think week. At least that's, where the idea came from
Hmm.
for that is he goes somewhere for a week, no tech, just books, and just sits there, thinks and reads. So, where does someone develop the patience? How important is it for patience, right? For somebody to develop patience for the creative output? Do you think it's required, or do you think it's a bonus for creativity?
I think it's enormously important. It's a requirement. Boredom is part of where you get that negative emotion we talked about earlier. That is part of how that happens. We're bored.
Yeah.
And we're constantly with incredible tech, from Game Boys to now they're called Switches or whatever, and everything. They're fun. I
Right.
mean, come on, there's stuff that is so fun, and I think there's a place that we, our self control maybe is another word to use as opposed to just patience. Having a point of saying I can say no to ABC, whatever it is that's taking all my time away. A TV, okay, go ahead and binge a TV show, but are you going to binge reading and learning and doing something with your hands and doing something with other people too? So are you willing to give yourself that? Because uh, we feel like we're resting when we're in front of a television set, but we're not.
Right.
um,
We're like
we're
mindless.
mindless or we're stressed because
Uh,
the character's doing something stupid, but we're not really in life, and we haven't called a friend in a long time. And people are so lonely. So patience is maybe one kind of indicator we don't have it, but we need the tribalism we talk about. We need friends. We need people who are there to tell us we're not satisfied with you because you're better than this, Rich, and I care about you, and I'm going to be with you the long haul. So we need that. We need rest in the sense of just like the think week. Yeah, we need our own think weeks. We need a think day. Somebody used to say it's like every uh, points of rest once a week, once a day, and then a month a year or something like that. Some formula that some people put up, whatever their formula is. I don't know. There's no science perhaps to that, but the fact of it is being able to just step back. So patience, I think, is the other factor. Those I'm extremely impatient. How can we create things of value? Yeah, I am. Like, okay, writing a book as an author. I wrote a short ebook before for church musicians and did really good, actually, surprisingly. So this book took a lot of time to write, research, multiple editors, painful feedback. So that way, by the time I got to people like you, it's like, okay, it's not too bad. To get to that point is hard, but that's just the beginning. Am I willing for 2 or 3 years to keep talking about this creation I have? That's part of the creative process too, is delivering it to the world and being engaged in what I make. And so I have to. There's no dopamine hit when you're in writing or authoring. Um, it, there's no viral sense for most of us. It takes sometimes even a decade for a book to be really appreciated. And so us being willing to look at longer time frames and looking at things what, for what we value, stoicism, right, is really an answer for all of this. I think we'd have a lot more satisfaction in the uphill battles that we fight and we face every day, seeing that the process has value. I will be at the other side of this. But if we try to never rest, never take a think week, and we get burned out, um, a company doesn't care. I mean, they're not designed to care. They're not designed for that. I think they should be, um, we're human institutions. It's a corporation. You can have
Right.
legal rights as a person, but yet it doesn't have any concern for a human's well-being over the number of dollars that are produced from its existence. That is not the
And I heard, I
yeah.
think a person is only what 3 to 4 hours of productivity time out of the 8 that they're working, right? So it's already 3 4 hours of unproductive time. So might as well give people time off to start thinking.
Oh, there's something. I think there is something to that. Google used to have 10% time long time ago. I don't know what they do now.
Yeah,
I mean, there's all these different things that people have learned. What was it? Daniel Pink's formula. You know, you need some autonomy. He said it in his book Drive, I think it was. We don't have any autonomy sometimes. Here's where you what you do. Yet we want you to be creative and solve problems. And so, how can you if you're never um, stepping back? Like the artist steps back with their thumb and they look at the perspective of what they're trying to create, from their sketch to the canvas to the actual building or whatever it is. How can we do that if we're constantly just sitting at a desk or whatever it is, cranking out more spreadsheets of something, and then asking, now it's going to be cranking out AI prompts. Um,
right. AI prompts while listening to some music
yeah, AI
and
prompts. Like
just
the AI prompt.
multitasking.
It's like, yeah. So, but we need to get
Gosh.
the patience is really in seeing it's really a mindset of process matters. My process as a person matters. So that's going to make me more valuable to a company. Because if I'm more productive in
Right.
those 3 or 4 hours, whatever it is, because I'm healthy and thriving, that's going to be better.
Right. Do you think, because you mentioned this briefly, do you think AI is going to destroy or enhance creativity? What is your guess?
What I think it's going to change creativity. One of the things about creativity that I'm hoping our society understands is people's physical labor has become less and less valued. Automation of all kinds, manufacturing automation, just as an example. But there's still young children putting together our iPhones and everything else that we're enjoying and feeling like drinking our single origin coffee with. We feel great about it, right? This is cool. Um, we don't value that human, the person making something, the artisan. Um, and I think that person who can do that and somehow get noticed doing it is going to be more valuable. A person who's able to have some patience and look at a longer curve. And they're kind of like, it's kind of like the movie The Matrix, where everybody's basically, uh, um, their body heat powers the machine. In essence, we're hoping for this almost. We're like wanting that as opposed to true freedom, which is the ability to dream and create something better for ourselves, our families, our friends. Um, Instead, what we'd rather have is how can we automate it all so we don't have to work as much? And now we're more exhausted by trying to do that. So AI is just
Right.
it's this terrible cycle of
Yeah, that's
it's
true.
like steroids again. We just want a pill. We want shot in the buttocks that gives us big muscles, and that's all we're looking for. We're not
We want
really
the shortcut.
yeah. A shortcut.
Yeah.
The hacking is not. We cannot hack creativity again. I think AI can copy a person's creativity to an amazing level, but there still was a person's hands at some point that they're copying. The sad thing is like being a musician on Spotify, 0.00001 cent is what every play of a song makes. And so someone like Adele makes 80,000 from Spotify. Someone like me or who else is that listening out there realizes, that's what AI promises to automate. The, you know, but the physical labor to create, um, it's getting harder to make money off of that. um, they call us content creators, which I hate that term because we don't exist.
Why is that?
We don't exist to create for a container. We exist to create for
Mm,
ourselves and for other people, for humans. Human beings aren't just a container. Even though this is how we're seen by social media companies, we are the product, and we got to realize this. We got to wake up to that. We have to wake up to the fact that value is not always this quantifiable thing. It's a qualitative thing. It's me being able to have a moment sometimes that I can control, and that I can make, and maybe take me some time to do that, and a moment to choose to be bored. If I at least have the choice. If I don't have the choice to ever get to that boredom, that's another issue. So yeah, our attention. Why do they want my attention? Because I can get something within 24 hours from Amazon. And I love it.
Right.
It's just the dopamine hits, man. I'm
Right.
so addicted to everything. I confess.
Right.
But I think
I think we all are to some
it's
extent.
terrible. But being an author has been humbling because I'm realizing the thing I love about writing is what I'm doing right now. I'm talking with another human being about ideas that I hope are transformational for me, or reminding myself of them, but also hopefully other people. Um, it can move the ball forward just a little bit for them. And that has a lot more value than simply, look, my social media following is bigger, my Twitter followers are bigger, whatever it is. No, it's actually human beings on the other side of the screen too. Like, that's one thing I love about blogging. And I came up with this saying only because a lot of people back then, of course, we had toxicity, but it was in AOL chat rooms where no one saw it online. Like,
Right.
so you were embarrassed before 100 people, not for 100,000 people, not
Right.
your whole town. But another person is on the other side of your screen or on the microphone, whatever it is that you're doing. And if we believe that, then all the tools, including AI, can be transformational. But it's the human being that embodies the thing of beauty and the power that is going to be life changing for another person. And one instance of this, um, and this article I'm going to put up, it's hard to write this one, but there's a young friend of mine who was deployed as a soldier who hit me up online, and I was late at night in my music studio, and I just talked to him. Hey, tell me some stories, and sent me some how big the bugs are in the Middle East and all this stuff. And I go, wow, that's really weird. I didn't realize that I talked him out of suicide twice. I didn't know that. We don't know the inverse of that could happen by our toxicity. And human connection is so important and powerful. And so if we have the humility to have empathy and to create as opposed to criticize, to create as opposed to tear down and destroy, we could use these tools, whatever they may be in the future, just as extensions like a paintbrush. And so I don't think it's the tool that is the scary part. It's us, it's me. And the other friends online, like this young friend, am I human to them? Am I hearing their story? And if that can happen, then great. And I just think creativity is a practice that can help us, I think, save AI, if anything.
Right. I think it's the way we're headed with AI and technology. It's almost, the idea of human connection is going to be more important than ever
Mhm.
before because, AI can whip out a, a course on creativity like that, right? But for example, if you came out with a course on creativity, people aren't just buying the course on creativity, they're buying your course on creativity, right? They're buying it because it's from Rich. It's the human connection aspect of that you're transmuting into the beauty of the art that you just created. So I think that's just so important for people to understand is because we see I'm starting to see it already. There's many people that are trying to make money quick with AI and making ebooks and just pumping out products like it's nothing because it's very easy for the AI to do. But that's I think the missing component there is the creativity, the human connection, right? The the connection to somebody is I think what we're gonna be headed towards. That's gonna be valued even more than just a product.
Well, I think what you just said there is very profound. And I think, like with social media or anything we do, um, content is not as important as connection. Content,
Right.
the world is online. I mean, the information is there. I am not a gatekeeper
Right.
for information. I'm just
Right.
I'm just a curator of life experiences that can help, put some directions, like try to click on this instead of this, in a non-binary way, in a way that is deeper than that. And but yeah, the connection is really the missing piece in all the things we've been talking about in creativity. We don't, if we're lonely, we're not going to be productive. We're not going to be happy. And we've created a society where we could be insulated with our devices and we can feel like we have a voice by yelling at each other. When we actually need to sit down and, have a meal and be a little awkward once in a while. And it's okay to be awkward, folks. That feeling of being awkward, being the first time at something is okay. Um, it'll inform you of what you really want and need more than you think.
I have one last question for you, Rich. As you know, this show is called Learn or Be Learned. So I love to ask my guests, lastly, as what is one thing that either one big lesson you learned from somebody else or you want the audience to learn from you that has, impacted your life?
I think the idea of finding a mentor and then being a mentor has been powerful. Um, there were times I sat with folks that were my age when I was young, probably younger than you even, and heard their story, and they weren't the most perfect people. And being willing to see their humility saved me a lot of pain, a lot of unnecessary pain. Let's put it that way. And then also gave me the value of saying, how can I pass on what I'm doing? It taught me that that is valuable, that the process of that is important. And I have two young adult children, and I love to be able to sit. I collaborate with one of them, and the other one, we have coffee all the time, sitting down, and we talk about all things of life like this, and it's wonderful. So I think the idea of mentorship is giving, serving another person um, at their pleasure, and I think that's powerful. I didn't realize that. I learned it as the mentee, and then now I'm thinking, oh, this is really valuable. And it's the even reason I wanted to write a book. I thought, well, if I write a book, maybe I could do a little more of this, because that's what it is—a human connection, just to cheer a person on. We all need to be seen. So for me to be seen, to allow yourself to be seen, is valuable. And I think those younger people in your audience here, don't be afraid of that. Find a person, um, and then also peer mentorship. That's great too. Those are things I sought early on, and those are valuable things. So people who, if you're a photographer, join a photographer group, uh, and be generous. I think that really is the key. Generosity. I was just at a creators night in San Jose. A friend was generous to have me as one of his panelists, and I saw him afterwards talking with these young people, like in their 20s, and he's kind of young. He's in his 30s, maybe barely, mentoring them about stuff. And they were everything from journalists to a computer coder to whatever, Silicon Valley's young people. And I said, this is great. And he's talking about generosity because you need to learn at your age how to be generous. So I wouldn't have seen that scene if I had not allowed him as a peer, even a younger peer, to be a mentor to me. So I think being willing to have a mentor and being vulnerable in it, um, you'll be amazed at what it will value it will give your life.
Right. It's almost the idea of contribution, right?
Hmm.
What can you contribute back? It reminds me of Patrick David. He's an entrepreneur and he often talks about the idea of when you are growing as a person, and since he's an entrepreneur, he often talks about business particularly, but this can be applied in the macrocosm, right? So he talks about when you're learning and growing, you should always have in your circle someone that's doing better than you, so you can always learn and look up, right? People on your same level and playing field, so you can do it together, right, as a community and grow. And you should always have someone that's, you know, I don't want to say below you, but maybe earlier in their career or just starting out, because you always need to give back as well. And
Mm.
he said that's like the formula that's really worked for him when it comes to growth.
I love that. It's kind of an artisan's code. It's like I'm a silversmith, and my point is to keep the guild going. And I think it's a
Mm.
really good historical point. If you see it in history, and I'm a geek about history sometimes too. But anyway, Sorry. So all you geeks out there, yay.
Right. Well, Rich, I really appreciate you being on this show. I think we had an awesome conversation. Where can the audience find you on social medias or on the internet?
Name is Rich Kirkpatrick. So if you go to rkblog.com, that's my site, and it'll take you to other places there.
And I'll have all that in the description as well, just for ease of access. But I appreciate you being here, Rich. It was an awesome conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you.